As we climb ever higher up the Carpathian peaks, here in the heart of Europe, we ask ourselves, what is it that is so remarkable about this landscape? We're 2,000 meters above the basins, or river valleys, and in a highland region of a variety that is unique in Europe. Ranges of quite different natures stretch out next to each other, and it is this diversity that delights the eye. Let us introduce you to this Carpathian mountain world. The heights of the Carpathians. In the center of Europe, a unique geographical unit is formed by the Carpathian arc of mountains and the basin it embraces. The continent's most unified and clearly defined geographical region is drawn from the multicolored mosaic that is this mountain world. The interdependence of mountains and basin, the harmony of that relationship, are emphasized by these natural factors. Let us put together the pieces of this colorful jigsaw that make up the dramatic wildness that is the Carpathian Mountains. Climbing the peaks and descending into the valleys, we get to know its separate parts, its geographic connections, the rich variety of landscape outline, and flora and fauna, which make up the fascinating picture that is this ever-changing mountain world. As we look at the map of Europe, it will surely occur to us that in the middle of the landmass we can see a large arced mountain range forming a closed and natural frame. This is the Carpathians, and they enclose within them the Carpathian basin. The Carpathian arc also connotes Europe's geographical center, the exact location of which is in the upper regions of the river Tisa. So what we have here is a kind of amphitheater from the upper levels of which rivers flow down into its center, and then, at various points, they can break through the mountain chains and make their way to the Black Sea. Only one inner catchment makes its final exit into the Baltic, the Poprad River, which later, together with the Dunajec, carries its water to the Vistula River. The Carpathians form an arc that runs between the Alps at the border between Western and Eastern Europe and the Balkans, the latter being a part of the Eurasian highlands. This arc traces from the Devane Straits on the Danube in the west to the iron gates of that river in the east and embraces the deep-lying Carpathian basin. 1,500-kilometer-long range forms a dividing wall between the internal lowlands and the regions beyond it. At its highest point, the Gerlakovsky Peak rises above 2,600 meters. Not only are geographical worlds divided by the Carpathian Ring, but historical and cultural ones too. For 100 years, it formed the natural borders of the Kingdom of Hungary. Its natural environment still determines today the way its inhabitants lead their lives. What, from a larger overview, seems a homogeneous arc of hills, close up shows a collection of smaller geographical units of uniquely varied character. 6 main regions differ substantially from each other. The northwest Carpathians run from the Hainberger Berge in the eastern Alps to the Toplov Valley. This part is the longest, broadest, and touristically the most popular uplands. From the Toplov River to the Viertop Pass, the northeastern Carpathians form the lowest, most moderate featured and least frequented section. The Eastern Carpathians form a section of outstanding interest in its minutely variegated nature, running from the Viertop Pass to the Prahova Valley. Dividing as it does Transylvania from Moldova, its geographical and folkloric aspects are particularly varied. From the Prahova Valley westwards, the Carpathians reveal their most uniform and highest average height range. These are the southern Carpathians, and they form the rampart between the Transylvanian basin and the Muntenanian and Altinian lowlands. In the lower Danube region, the Carpathian Arc joins with the Banat Mountains and provides access to the Balkans beyond the Danube. Inside the crescent so formed between the Great Hungarian Plain and the Transylvanian Basin rises the island of the party-coloured mid-Transylvanian uplands. Although we can break down the Carpathians into component parts, we get closer to their nature if we examine the geological elements and divide the whole into 4 belts. Each belt has characteristic geological features. The volcanic belt, one of Europe's most spectacular, is to be found here. Stretches from the Burjön hills to the Hargita uplands, and here we find rock formations dating from 15 million years ago, along with others going back several tens of thousands of years. Andesite is particularly characteristic of this belt. If we seek a less concentrated formation, we need to look in the so-called Flysch belt, where we find the conglomeration, that is, the sandstone, to be so crumbling that high hills could not possibly be compounded out of it. We have, however, only to think of the Bucegi Mountains, which rise above 2,000 meters and is formed of this material. A far harder and much more endurable material is limestone, which forms either cliffs or a skin over older rock formations. This latter can be found in the deep Carpathian gorges. The 4th main rock formation is the crystalline. Here we find granite and many forms of altered state rock, such as slate. These materials form the highest and most substantial peaks, and if we examine them closely, we can even see the glacier scarring on their surfaces. The Carpathians took millions of years to form. Tectonic plate movement and the upward pressure of ground-up rock formations give the background to this process. This elevation process produced intense volcanic activity in the Earth's crust, added to which it also forced an equivalent depression inside the ring of hills, thus forming the enclosed basin. This basin became the Pannon Sea, which, as it gradually filled, created the forebearers of today's rivers. During the Ice Age, in the highest regions, an alpine landscape was created. In the lowland, a cold, dry climate produced a covering of dust brought by the winds from the north, and which formed a covering layer of loess sediments. The geographical diversity of the Carpathians determines the hill formations, landscape layout, and land use. In this environment, we can distinguish 4 separate geological belts. During the geological shifting that formed these mountains, rock and sea sediments collected in vast layers. For the entire length of the range, a belt of crystalline rock links the highest peaks. Set into this crystalline belt, and occasionally covering it, is a run of limestone cliffs standing out from the multitude of free-rising peaks. They can also be seen in the limestone layers or bedding plains. The Flysch belt is made up of varying sediments and runs the length of the edge of the Carpathians, welding the peaks into a uniform setting. These regions are largely made up of more gentle wooded hills. Where the edge of the basin meets the hill range to the east and the southeast, the more recent volcanic range rises steadily. The hills here produced by volcanic activity retain their original volcanic outline. Let us get to know in close-up the more significant aspects of the multifaceted Carpathian's richness of outline. Piling clouds, steep cliffs, emerging peaks. We're in the highest and wildest part of the Carpathians. If we pick out a particular cliff, it's quite possible it reached its current position from somewhere far off. Once glaciers moved here. They carved these deep valleys and gouged out the hollows, which now have become glittering mountain lakes. If we get above 2,000 meters, it's freezing, and rock cannot resist frost. It cracks and falls apart, which is why the mountain crests are sharp-edged. The highest of the Carpathians are the lowest of the world's great mountain ranges. Because of their height, here the ice endured longest. Their piling up scored the valleys deep and forced them to retreat while narrow ridges and sharp peaks rose above them. Up on the high tops, crystal-clear lakes formed in the depressions carved by ice or dammed by morainic ridges. The combination of bleak climate and bare rock are home to an unusual wildlife. The huge rocks and meadows between them are an ideal habitat for the highly adaptable chamois. The extensive rock glaciers are perfect retreat for that sturdy mountain rodent, the marmot. Along with highland animals and the resistant vegetation, the occasional human visitor makes up the mountain habitat. The first to visit the rocky peaks would have been mountain hunters, treasure hunters, and the more adventurous shepherds. Later they came in larger numbers, purely for discovery or the view, and so slowly grew the business of mountain tourism. Associations were formed which devoted themselves to discovering peaks, mapping out tourist paths, building tourist chalets, and drawing up guidebooks. The ever-increasing urbanization is, at the same time, putting a significant strain on the highland environment. At the most popular sites, mountain trails and cable cars make the once not easily accessed high peaks available to ever larger numbers of people. During recent years, an increasing number of areas of the Carpathians have been designated national parks or nature reserves in order to preserve this vulnerable environment. Let us now look at the wild Carpathians and climb the highest peaks. The Carpathians' highest range, which is also the world's smallest high mountain region, is that king of the northwest range, the High Tatras. The granite peaks, glacial valleys, and cirques of the Carpathians' most thoroughly explored and most popular range bears witness to its formation in the Ice Age. The Tatra National Park also embraces the High Tatras' neighbour, the lower and less dramatic Western Tatras. To the northeast is also found the Bela Tatras. The most enhanced attraction for tourists in the eastern Carpathians are the dramatic rocky peaks of the Rodna Mountains. They were once so popular as a skiing paradise that the Winter Olympics would be held there before the outbreak of the Second World War intervened. The most eastern range of the South Carpathians is the Bucegi Massif. Composed of sedimentary rock and rising above 2,000 meters, it forms a wide plateau from which, on every side, huge cliffs plunge downwards. It owes its popularity to the plateau's wind-scarred sandstone crags and uniquely wild cliff faces. Next to the Bucegi, the real curiosity is the Piatri Crailuli, the limestone crest of which sticks sharply out of the South Carpathians running from east to west. The sharp outline of this hard sandstone and the narrow ledges give, primarily in winter, a genuine high mountain impression. The South Carpathians' highest and longest crystalline alpine region is that of the Fogaras Alps. Transylvania's most popular southern border range displays cirques dotted with mountain lakes, above which 2,500 meter plus peaks rise. The pride of the southern Carpathians is the outstandingly proportioned Retezat Mountains, a genuine alpine region rising above the Hot Egg Basin. In the 1930s, its rare flora caused it to be designed as a reserve. Genuinely dramatic mountain outlines occur only occasionally in the Carpathians, and our mountain arc's most characteristic ranges are much milder. The slopes, predominantly, continue right to the tops, which themselves form alpine meadows. So, if we look up from the lowlands, we see woodland, but above 1,700 to 1,800 meters, it is too cold for tree growth. Up here is the home of the high mountain or alpine meadow. And though we say of these mountains that they are wild and inhospitable, it is still a practicable landscape. The most characteristic upper region Carpathians above the tree line are alpine meadows ranging from the tops of these high hills. Their lack of symmetry is a crucial element. While the colder northern slopes display a more uneven outline, the southern slopes are regularly milder and meadow-like. This alpine meadow region, easily negotiable as it is and appropriate for husbandry, has been used for such for millennia. These spacious ridges are used primarily for animal husbandry. Where the grazing need exceeds the capacity of the existing meadows, forest clearance and intensive grazing are resorted to. In this way, an animal husbandry culture has been created that is unique to the Carpathians. Next to animal husbandry, these gentle Carpathian slopes offer opportunities for sport and popular tourism. The long, wide ridges are ideal hiking territory, and in winter, the slopes offer excellent skiing. Let us look at a few of these stretches of alpine meadow. In the northern Carpathians, above the Lipto Basin, runs the main ridge of the Low Tatras. This ridge, running almost exactly at 2,000 meters, lies in the east of Slovakia and offers a unique view of the hills north of the Carpathian Basin. The Malafatra runs just above the tree line and cuts the Vag River Valley in two. It is covered in alpine grazing, as its lower neighbour, the Velka Fatra. In the northeast Carpathians, where the river Tisa has its source, is the Maramoros Mountains' highest range, the Chornohora. It forms the border between the historical Carpat Olia and Galicia and is home to the Carpathian Biosphere Reserve. The Carpathian's highest volcanic hill is found in the Kalimani Mountains. At 2,000 meters, its vast volcanic rim glaciated during the Ice Age. These wide-spreading gentle hill lines are also to be found in the South Carpathians. When we speak of the Carpathians, two things come to mind. On the one hand, the highest and most dramatic skylines, on the other, the enormous forests, which too are a major Carpathian characteristic. It is not for nothing that in the Middle Ages, Hungarians called these lower hill ranges forests. For example, the Bakoin and Matra forests. The Carpathian tree line runs between 1,600 and 1,800 meters, thus placing the majority of our hill regions below that line. It was the forest that drew man ever higher into the Carpathians, and they provide regions of considerable landscape interest. For example, the Carpathian volcanic region is largely forested. The Carpathian forests, rather than offering breathtaking views, intrigue the visitor with fascinating rarities. Amongst these are the one-time volcanoes and the less dramatic belts of crystalline rock and sandstone, which make up the magical remains of the limestone bedding plains. In the extensive forests, natural phenomena complete the rich mosaic of the Carpathian world. The low-lying forest regions are the richest of the Carpathian habitats. The oak forests of the medium and higher hills, independent of location, rise from 600 to 800 meters. In the rich substratum, with the forests broken up with myriad clearings, can be found squirrels, wild boar, roe, and red deer. The heights ranging from 600 to 1,400 meters, being of a cooler climate, are covered with beech forest. The sparse undergrowth, allowed by the dense and closed canopy of this forest, gives home primarily to lynx, wolf, and bear. Above the beeches begin the pine forests, for which the Carpathians' most characteristic evergreen is the spruce. Amongst mosses and ferns, large predators can be encountered. These lower belts, closer to the central basin, have always been sites of human habitation. And the forest's raw materials have, for centuries, determined the lifestyle of their inhabitants. In order to provide themselves with the necessary materials for settlement, building, and land for agriculture, haymaking and grazing, the inhabitants of the scattered hill villages carried out extensive forest clearance. Along with this, the glass foundries and charcoal burning further reduced the area of forest. The Carpathians, thanks to the geological conditions, are particularly rich in minerals. Close on a quarter of known minerals can be found here, and more than 50 of them were first discovered here. The history of the mining of raw minerals goes back for millennia. Left over from eventual industrial decline are newly reopened forest railways and reservoirs, which are primarily used to serve the tourist industry. The Carpathian Basin is one of Europe's richest sources of thermal baths. Bathing and health tourism enjoy a significantly important tradition. The mineral water springs, created by post-volcanic activity and the emissions of gases, have been used for these purposes for centuries. Let's have a look at the forest region. In the northern volcanic hill region are found the historical Upper Hungary's gold mines. Noble metals have been mined from the bowels of the Selmeci and Körmeci hills for centuries. Through gold and silver, this mining region acquired for itself a European-wide reputation. Here once functioned the world's oldest mint. Volcanic peaks, remains of craters and outcrops of andesite bear witness to the past of the Gutin Hills. Along the fault lines there can be found rich seams of non-ferrous metals, and these have given a living to the miners of the Maramoros and Baimara valleys for millennia. The dramatic volcanic heights of the East Carpathians divide the Transylvanian basin from the lowland hollows of the Sekla region. In the geographical and ethnographic region of the Sekla region lies the Sekla's sacred upland, the Hargita. This is the East Carpathian's most extensive volcanic upland mass, in a chain of plateaus formed out of relatively recent volcanoes. Even today, accompanying signs of volcanic activity can be observed in this mysterious landscape. Witness the mineral water springs and the curative gases that bubble up from the depths. Many kinds of peat bog are here found within these craters and caldera. Within the body of the Chomad lies the lake of St. Anna, which has not yet turned into a bog. The Sekla Hills are noteworthy because it is perhaps here that human habitation is most closely related to the natural environment. Working the ancient soil of the hollows between the hills, the settlers adhere faithfully to their long-established spiritual heritage. In the depths of the Transylvanian forest, the legendary Jilkosh, tall, killer lake, was created by a landslide in 1837. As we descend the Carpathians, we find ourselves in an increasingly gentle landscape. Now the astonishing sights of the forest grow scarcer. Here, however, we find the Carpathian gorges, which are perhaps the most exotic sights. What is required to form a narrow limestone ravine of several hundred meters depth? Plainly, a waterfall that continually bores itself into the hard limestone, also falls into which the water can find its way. If water does indeed find its way here, it means that it can open up passes through the hill range. The human point of view is also crucial, as in several of the Carpathian ranges, these gorges ensure access. The limestone sections of the Carpathians manifest themselves as small islands of the rock form, or as the remains of larger limestone bedding plains. As erosion does its work, it creates some remarkable things. Its unceasing activity creates spectacular caves, sinkholes, cliff faces and defiles, waterfalls and precipices. These ravines, gouged into the hills by water erosion, are a particular geographical feature of this karst landscape. Within the huge walls of the closed and deep ravines, a unique, cool and damp microclimate is created, which produces its own peculiar life forms. In the Carpathian karst, water has worked to create an extensive cave system. The world's largest ice deposits are to be found in the Carpathian ice caves. In the ravines, the smaller streams boast splendid waterfalls. The karst once had a strategic role, providing passes and narrows, and there was always a need for the excellent building stone. Let us descend into a few of these Carpathian gorges. The load-bearing hills of the Gömör-Sepersy range, both in the north and in the south, are covered with an unusually spectacular limestone bedding plain, into which rivers and streams have cut their own deep beds. The watercourses of the Carpathian karst have, over millennia, dug out for themselves narrow and dramatic ravines. In the defiles, the small streams tumble over spectacular waterfalls. One of the Carpathians' largest karst is the Gömör-Tornai. This huge limestone mass has been carved by rivers into 7 separate plateaus. Beneath the surface, they have formed thousands of cavities of varying sizes and the stalactite caves, which are now part of the World Heritage System. The Hagymas range displays remarkable and steep rock formations. The cliffs at the edge of the Egyes Kő are one of the symbols of the nature of the hard Carpathian limestone, and the Carpathians' most famous ravine, the Békás Gorge. Unusually varied limestone bedding plains decorate the mid-Transylvanian hill range with their crystalline massifs. The Pardis rugged karst is an interesting example of this. Even in the relatively small Bihar hill range, karst elements can be found. The flow of karst water produces the most unusual geological phenomena, both below and above ground. In the limestone ravines, we sense something is missing, which is, in fact, that the limestone has been washed out. On the cliffs, however, there is a surplus of limestone. What is the origin of these limestone cliffs and why do they intrigue? Limestone is extremely hard, harder by and large than what surrounds it. Nature's selective destruction, via wind and water, more easily erodes anything other than limestone. Thus, over time, the limestone gains height over its shrinking surroundings. Lone limestone peaks are a characteristic determining feature of the Carpathian landscape. We find the main cliff belt in the northwest Carpathians, but away from this, in the eroded remains of limestone bedding plains, cliffs are also to be found. In all, some 4,000 cliffs rise in the Carpathians. Their inaccessibility and unique microclimates offer refuge to unusual vegetation. These cliffs also have a strategic significance. Those guarding the borders did not always succeed in holding the Carpathian passes against invaders from the east, which is why, after the Tatar invasions, a chain of stone fortresses were built in the most advantageous positions at the tops of the steepest cliffs. The limestone cliffs and the fortresses atop them are indeed the most extreme dwelling places in the Carpathians, but naturally, ordinary habitation is to be found in the lowlands. This is as it should be, for we live in the Carpathian basin, whether individually we live in the Dur basin, or the Great Hungarian Plain, or the Transylvanian lowlands, which are all geographical basins or catchment areas. And, of course, there are also the basins enclosed by the high hill ranges of the Carpathians themselves. It is a characteristic of these highland basins that during the winter the cold air coming down from the heights settles in them, making them 10 to 20 degrees centigrade colder. So when one gets up in the morning, one looks out to find everything immersed in cloud. But that doesn't mean that there isn't sunshine on the tops. So the valley dweller seeks higher levels where the sky is always blue. The basin landscapes of the Carpathians comprise 3 large main basins and many smaller hill-bound ones. The most extensive of the main ones are the Dur basin in the west, the Great Hungarian Plain in the middle, and the Transylvanian basin sunk in the eastern hill landscape. The Carpathians form a huge catchment area, its ridges forming vast watersheds. The water flowing down from these ridges collects in the catchment basins, and the majority of the rivers so formed find their way into the Danube. This basin landscape has 3 climate regions: continental, oceanic, and Mediterranean. The undulating hill conditions fundamentally affect the individual region's climates. While on the Great Hungarian Plain the yearly average temperature is 10 degrees centigrade, that in the alpine regions remains under freezing. The most copious rainfall is found in the western hills, while the driest climate is on the Great Hungarian Plain and among the hill region basins. Thanks to the encircling Carpathian ridge, the interior of the basin is so protected from wind that wind speed is markedly lower than that in other open European regions. This defending Carpathian ring attracted human settlement from ancient times on. The Scythians were followed by the Huns, who were in turn followed by their successors, the Avars, who formed the first empire in the Carpathian basin. The Arpad tribes of the Magyars took over the Avar heritage in the 9th century and occupied the vast territory for the ensuing millennium. The defence line of the Carpathians acted as an obstacle to eastern armies seeking to attack both the Kingdom of Hungary and Europe. Defending themselves against the Tartars and the Turks and other vicissitudes served to seriously reduce the Magyar population, allowing other ethnic groups from beyond the mountains to settle in the basin's depopulated areas. Chiefly Slovaks, Ruthenes, Romanians and Saxons, along with the South Slavs, adding new colours to the mountain region's ethnic map. At the end of the process, Hungary, broken by war, endured the complete breakdown of its geographical entity, and the natural frontiers offered by the Carpathians ceased to have any effect. Within it, new states were formed, while the Magyar outline was confined to the basin interior. This, then, is the world of this arc of mountains. Whoever mounts the Carpathian peaks or descends the valleys will sense a particular atmosphere which emanates from its variety and the spirit of the peoples dwelling in it. Each part intrigues with its own wonders. Wandering its hills is a great experience, but also a responsibility. We have to take care of this world so that the natural and cultural riches that lie within it remain, and so that the landscape we have inherited from our forebears remains rich and varied for our heirs. We have come to know the wild outlines of the Carpathians, strode its gentle regions, descended the wooded slopes, found its gorges, climbed its limestone cliffs, and found our way in its stupendously varied highlands. All this, however, can only really be experienced if we go the length of these ranges. So, on with our boots and up the Carpathian.